All right, Alexander, let's talk about Anthony Blinken's trip to Europe and his meeting with NATO foreign ministers, with the NATO's chief, NATO's head honcho, Mr. Stoltenberg. And I think it's, to sum it all up, I guess Russia's bad. We'll try to work with them, but Russia is bad. And China's all right. China's cool. We'll let Europe deal with China and no problems there. So, I mean, that's pretty much the summarization of the entire meeting between Blinken and EU officials and Stoltenberg and NATO officials. Brought it out, Alexander.
Well, I have to say, again, I found it a speech full of cliches and of no real substance and of no real merit. I think you summed it up actually very well. Russia bad in every conceivable way. We don't really like them, and we're going to do what we can with them. And they are a military threat because they're modernizing their nuclear arsenal and they're developing all kinds of disinformation strategies on all kinds of fronts. So we don't want to deal with them. China, well, also pretty bad. But, at the same time, we do understand and we do accept that you, our friends in Europe, might want to deal with them from time to time. And of course, we will too. And we will deal with Russia and China on such matters as are in our own interests. So, we will have our cake and eat it as well with them. And at the same time, massive focus in this speech, throughout the speech, about values. The whole thing is now going to be based on values. This is what NATO is all about, apparently. It's all about values. And not, by the way, on national security issues or protection from military threats or all of those things. In fact, Blinken seems to be intent on downplaying the significance of military threats. And also some things which I found really rather strange and which show, to my way of thinking, how little the US sees how its own actions are perceived around the world. So let's look at this. I mean, we have lots of comments from Blinken about the importance of sanctions and about the need, to use sanctions in an effective way, and that seems to be now the primary tool in US and Western policy. But then he makes comments like this. We've seen how Beijing and Moscow are increasingly using access to critical resources, markets and technologies to pressure our allies and drive wedges between us. Of course, each state's decision is its own, but we must not separate economic coercion from other forms of pressure. So, of course, when one of us is coerced, we should respond as allies and work together to reduce our vulnerability by ensuring our economies are more integrated with each other than they are with our principal competitors. So when we sanction other countries, that's good and fine. When they sanction us, that's economic coercion and pressure. When they integrate their economies in order to protect themselves from our sanctions, which is what the Russians and the Chinese are doing, well, that's dangerous. When we do it, we are acting, we're showing solidarity between each other as allies. This is all in one paragraph. And Blinken, and I think this is actually the case, seems completely unaware of the contradictions in his own statement there. Just as he seems to be completely oblivious to contradictions in comments that he makes about the Russian medication Sputnik V. He accuses the Russians of engaging in a massive disinformation campaign against Western medications. And then, of course, he seems quite unaware of the fact that there's been far more comment and pressure against Sputnik V in the West. And we know, in fact, that the United States government actually persuaded the Brazilian government not to adopt Sputnik V because Sputnik V is supposedly a medication produced by a country which is a bad actor. So there seems to be a bizarre lack of understanding of the outside world and an inability to see that the US is criticizing other countries, China and Russia, for doing precisely the sort of things it does on a much bigger scale itself. And of course, it's getting ripostes. So, of course, the US says that, we were going to deal with China and especially with Russia in matters which are which is when it's in our interests to do so. And we get, in response to that, comments from Putin like this one, which he made very recently in a speech he gave. I'm bringing this up because I know that the United States are determined to maintain certain relations with us, but on matters that are of interest to the United States and on its terms. Even though they believe we are just like them, we are different. We have different genetic, cultural, and moral codes, but we know how to uphold our interests. We will work with the United States, but in the areas that we are interested in and on terms that we believe are beneficial to us. They will have to reckon with it, despite their attempts to stop our development, despite the sanctions and insults. They will have to reckon with this. So what Putin is saying is, no, we're not going to deal with you on issues that are of interest to you. We are going to deal with you on the issues which are of interest to us. It's mirror imaging. But of course, when Putin says it, he does it with his tongue firmly in his cheek. When Blinken talks in this way, he's completely oblivious to this fact. He is completely unaware that others are reading these things and they're saying to themselves, well, who is this person? Has he thought through what he's saying? He seems to think only in cliches. He assumes US good, everyone else bad. US has a right to do this, that, and the other. And of course, we're going to try and do the same because that's what the US, what is good for the US is by definition good for us. It's a very, very strange speech indeed. And I have to say, I think NATO allies who were coming away looking for a strong lead from Blinken will not have got it. And I'm going to add one other thing. It really struck me how Blinken didn't say anything at all about Nord Stream 2, even though he talked about the need for economies, Western economies, not to put themselves in a position where the adversary powers, Russia and China, might be in a position to exert leverage. So I thought a poor speech from Blinken, if I was going to grade it, I'd give it a D-.
Yes, I mean, it's obvious that Russia doesn't care anymore to deal with the U.S. I think that's obvious at this point, or at least not with the Biden White House. I think it's also obvious that everyone in Europe looks at the Biden White House and sees that they can't really depend on the U.S. in the way they depended on the U.S. before, which is why I think Blinken threw in the caveat that he'll let cooperation with China slide for NATO members and EU countries. So the U.S. is going to give permission to countries in Europe to deal with China and countries in NATO to deal with China. For that, Blinken is okay, but that's as far as he'll go. That's what I got out of the speech. The red line for the United States is dealing with Russia, except for certain situations where they can't really find another way around it, like say maybe, and this is maybe, Nord Stream 2 maybe, but I'm thinking things like using Russian rocket technology for spacecraft, or perhaps using Russian territory in order to get military supplies in and out of Afghanistan or Pakistan or whatever, whatever they need to do. There, I think that the U.S. will let some things slide. But outside of that, it's pretty much globalism without Russia and a little bit of and China because, well, Biden really can't do much about his China thing. So that was the gist of it.
Precisely so. I mean, it comes across, I have to say this, as incredibly weak. The US doesn't really like its allies dealing with China, but it can't prevent them doing so. So it says, well, we know that you don't really like our policies towards China. So go ahead and do what you want with China, but do bear in mind that we are allies and we have to have certain protections and mutual interests and things of that kind. It's very weak. It's not really the United States coming along saying to its allies, like, China is a threat. We must stand up to China. We've all got to work together to face down this challenge we're getting from China. What it says is, well, we don't really like very much that China does, but, if you want to cooperate and work with China, well, that's fine. That's up to you. We're not going to do very much about it. And on Russia, I think you're absolutely right. Russia is not the economic megalith that China is. It's not this vast, titanic, global economic superpower. It is a military challenge. And so they think that, we can be horrid to the Russians because there isn't really going to be much, pushback on that. But at the same time, we're going to deal with the Russians when it suits us, and the Russians will be expected to comply. Only, as I said, and I've just quoted Putin, the Russians have said they won't necessarily comply. So if the United States, for example, wants deals on strategic weapons, it might find that the Russians are actually less accommodating on that than they might otherwise have been if there was proper relations between Russia and the US, or alternatively, and this is another big issue, where the US is trying to work out some kind of policy for its relations with Iran. Again, it might find that Russia is less helpful on topics like Iran and Afghanistan, say, than it was 10, 15 years ago, when it was actually prepared to help the US come to some kind of compromises with the political forces in those countries. So it's just a mess. I have to say this. I mean, there is no real overarching architecture to this. And as I said, a bizarre inability to see that the US complains when its adversaries do things to the US and its allies, like impose sanctions, if you like, or engage in disinformation, when in fact it is the US, which on a much bigger scale is doing those sort of things itself. Doesn't seem as if Blinken is capable of understanding all of this. I think the Europeans listening to all of this will go away, say to themselves, there's nobody really in charge in Washington. This Secretary of State is obviously not somebody we take entirely seriously. We're going to go ahead and do whatever we want, each of us in his own way. We're going to forge relations with China because that's what we want to do. We're going to disregard any Americans' concerns about that. We're going to have Chinese investing in our 5G networks. We're going to continue working with the Russians on gas imports. We're going to do whatever we like because there is nobody really in Washington who is able to control us or hold us to account or give us any sort of lead which we can follow.
All right. So here's what I think the Europeans are going to get out of this, and NATO members. They're going to get out of this who cares about all this blah, blah from Anthony Blinken, as long as they keep the money, the dollars rolling into NATO, rolling into Europe. I think they're going to be happy. Plus, they get all the money from China as well. So, when you compare it to how Donald Trump treated NATO and his stance with dealing with NATO, which was getting NATO to pay up, I think NATO, Stoltenberg was absolutely happy. He went along with all of this. Secretary General Stoltenberg, he was ecstatic about this this speech from from Blinken. And I think all the NATO members are just going to be like, all right, Mr. Blinken, that's fine, blah, blah, morals, values, let's stick together.
Yeah.
Russia bad, China good. Now go home and just keep on sending us more and more money. And I think they're happy with that. So the racket's going to continue. The racket's going to continue.
Absolutely. It's going to get worse. I mean, what will they construe when they hear words like this? I'm quoting Blinken specifically now. The United States won't force our allies into an us or them choice with China. There's no question that Beijing's coercive behavior threatens our collective security and prosperity. But that doesn't mean that countries can't work with China where possible. So, it says, China is this massive threat, but, do whatever you like. So they'll go away. They'll say, right, we'll do our trade deals with China. We'll do whatever we want with China. And in return, we'll say a few things about values, which is what Blinken seems to be really worried about. And the US can go on giving us all the money we want for our defence and providing us with all the protection we want for our defence so that we don't have to do it ourselves. And that's, I think, a wonderful racket, which I think the Europeans are very happy with. And they'll come away from this meeting entirely reassured that it's all back to what it was in the good old days of Obama, only even better, because Obama at least was in some sort of control, whereas in Washington, there is no one in control at all now.
Yeah. Man, what an S show this is turning out to be. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Alexander Verkers, thank you very much.
I read an article somewhere saying this is the worst start in the foreign policy of any administration, and that was in the British media. I've tried to find that article since, and maybe I will soon. But I remember reading it, and I have to say I agree. I mean, it's an abject performance at every level. Abject performance with Russia, abject performance with China, as we saw at Anchorage, and no one in Europe, in NATO, is going to be impressed by this speech, which, by the way, has received minimal coverage here. Minimal coverage.
They don't care. People in Europe don't care. They're just
care.
Just send us the money. That's all they're telling Biden and Blinken. Just send us the money and go home. That's literally all they're telling him.
Go on sending us the money. If you don't, who knows? Something bad might happen. I mean, we might actually, in that case, get even closer to Beijing. I mean, it's an astonishing thing to read. The Secretary of State say, the United States won't force our allies into an us or them choice with China. What does that even mean? I mean, it's a bizarre position for a US Secretary of State to take. Either China is a threat and must be treated as such, or it is not. If it is a threat, you can't come along and say to people convincingly, well, we think China's a threat, but we don't want you to take an us or them position. I mean, it's just silly.
It means that last week in Alaska, China put the beat down on Blinken. Blinken understood exactly what China's position was, and Blinken understands that China is now the big dog in the playground. When you read those words, that's exactly what those words say. Those words say that there's a new big man on in the neighborhood. That's exactly what those words say. Period. And Blinken's scared.
Absolutely, that's exactly how it comes across. And of course, the Germans, the French, all of these people will be very pleased. They'll be rubbing their hands with glee, and they'll say, we're in the best of all worlds. The Americans will go on funding us, and we'll go ahead and do all our deals with the Chinese, and indeed even the Russians, I suspect, that we want to do, because all is well with the world. The United States will not really object, and will go on paying us our money. Or their money.
Yeah. At the end of the day, they're just going to get their money, and that's they were happy with that. So anyway, all right, guys, go to the Duran shop, pick up some merch, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, make sure you are still subscribed, and PayPal, Patreon, subscribe, star, Bitcoin, EMC, Hex, Litecoin, Ethereum. All those links are in the description box down below.
And please don't forget to also subscribe to our channels and to go to our Discord server and to check us out for our new broadcasts on this channel. And we look forward to you joining us in future programs again. Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody.